Adobe Illustrator demonstration, I'm going to talk about starting a new file and working with that initial document setup. It can be a little intimidating at first to beginning students, so I'm going to go through some of the basics that you need to know within this first module. Um, we're going to talk about opening a new file, basic document setup. I'm going to introduce you to the idea of bleed, color space, and other beginning settings you'll need to know. And then how you save a file, the difference between your working file, which is an AI or Illustrator document, versus exported documents that you have all types of options of documents that you can export from Adobe Illustrator. So let's get started. If I go under the drop-down menu File and select New, I'm presented with this little dialog box. It's the New Document dialog box. And here I can name my document if I know what I'm working on. So in this case, I'm working on a demo. Now the profile, there's a lot of preset profiles that you can choose from, and it's kind of interesting to explore these a little bit. Let's say that we're going to do a basic print profile. So we're working on a document that we intend to get printed as opposed to web or video and film. And it defaults to the following setup. We're going to have one artboard on screen within our workspace. It's going to use this letter size, and it defaults to working in points for print. Now sometimes you'll have a very specific document setup. For example, if you put it in inches, letter size is what you could print on a normal printer within an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. But what if you wanted to work on something else, for example, a business card? Then you can change by clicking in the width and height. You can actually change those parameters. So if I wanted to make a business card, I could type in 3.5 inches by a height of 2 inches. So I can change my width and height here. And notice how the orientation has changed. This is a landscape orientation for the business card versus a portrait orientation, which we had with the original letter. If I choose letter and choose the orientation of portrait, that changes the width to 8.5 and the height to 11 inches. So notice by clicking on landscape versus portrait, you can change that. Now, what is the bleed? Well, let's go back to our business card concept. If I had this set to 3.5 by 2, and the printer that I'm working with says that I need 1/8 of an inch bleed. Well, that's equal to 0.125 inches. 1/8 of an inch is also equal to 0.125. Now notice right now that this little chain link is engaged, meaning it's darkened in. So we know that if I type something in, then we plan the bleed to be equal around all sides of our business card. So if I click in here and type in 0.125, notice how it changes all of the edges of where that bleed is. And what the bleed means is, let's say we wanted a background color and we wanted to have that print, but the printer is actually going to do the cutting of these business cards after they're printed. If we don't have that background color bleed beyond the edge of the 3.5 by 2 inches, in other words, bleeding beyond at 1/8 of an inch beyond those edges, then it's possible that the printer could cut the edges and there might be a little bit of white paper showing. And so we want to avoid that. So if you want a color, a continuous tone color to bleed all the way to the edge of a document that's going to be cut, then you want to use what is known as a bleed. And the printer will tell you whether they want it to be 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, depending on the document that's being printed. Now these advanced settings can be accessed here. Now we're working on a print project in this example, so I'm going to use the CMYK color mode. If we were working on a web project, then we would choose the RGB color space. In a later module, you will learn the differences between CMYK and RGB and why one is preferred to another depending on the type of project. But just for now, set it to CMYK for this print project. Now, the points per inch refer to the number of pixels that will print within a 1 inch by 1 inch space. Now, raster effects refers to the number of pixels or the amount of pixel dots within that 1 inch by 1 inch space. The lowest recommended points per inch for print projects is 300 ppi. If we were working on a web project, then we would choose screen resolution because our output would be for the web, which appears on a display screen. But in this case, it's a print project, so I'm going to choose 300 ppi. Those advanced settings can be accessed here. And you can expand and contract simply by clicking on this little arrow. And I click OK. So here we are with our little basic business card setup. And notice that it keeps our original name that we had set in our new document setup. Also notice I have two tabs. These two image windows are related to the two projects that I had going. And you can have a number of projects going on at once. Each one, keep in mind, uses a bit of your virtual memory. So the more that you have up, the more virtual memory that's being used in your computer. But I just have these two little projects going right now, so I'm not taxing the computer too much. But notice how easy it is for me to click between projects by using those little document window tabs. Now if I wanted to, let's see, I'm making a business card, and let's say I'm going to use this bleed, which is indicated by this little red outline. So remember, we're going to bleed beyond the edge here, and let's say that I change my background color here to a bright orange. Lovely. And I have completed the artwork and illustration for this business card. If I wanted to then save this document, I would go under File, Save As. Now in this case, I'm just going to save it to my desktop, and this is going to be a little demo. And it's going to go onto the desktop as demo.ai. The .ai extension refers to your Illustrator document. This is your working file. As you work, you're going to always be using this Adobe Illustrator working file. You can save it as other formats, including Illustrator EPS or Adobe PDFs. But as you're working, until you've really completed the project, you're going to typically work in this Adobe Illustrator format, which is your working file or your working format. It's important to save often as you work, so that you don't lose some of the work that you've already done in case of power outage, computer crash, those types of things. So we're going to click on Save. Now as I click on Save, I get a little dialog box with little Illustrator options. I can choose different versions. If I needed to share this with a friend who might not have the same Illustrator version as I have, then I can choose a previous version of Illustrator. Also, if you're moving from one workstation to another, let's say you have Illustrator CS6 at home, but then you go to a classroom that might only have Illustrator CS5 installed, then you'd want to save back to that previous version of Illustrator. I know, it's kind of a pain. If you forget to do that and then you go to a workstation that has a previous version, you wouldn't be able to open the document. So that's one little point of note that makes things a little more complicated. For now, let's use these very basic default settings, and then in the bottom right you're going to click on OK. And now you have successfully saved the document. You can tell it's saved because the little star or little asterisk disappears from your tab in the image window tabs. And so you've successfully saved your Illustrator document. One other thing to look at is if you go under File, Export, you can export this as a number of different types of documents. You can also save a copy. You could also save for web, or if you're setting up templates for use in future projects, you can do that as well. Let's look at File, Save for Web. I could actually export a PNG or a GIF or a JPEG depending on what type of graphic I wanted to export for web delivery. I could also save a copy of this. Under Save a Copy, I can choose a number of things, including a PDF, which is a portable document format. So I can make a copy of this in the portable document format and hit Save, and it brings up this dialog box. Now there's a bunch of default settings that Illustrator have, but what if I wanted to print this? I might want to choose, now your printers will typically give you the settings that they prefer. They might tell you to use the default press quality settings, for example. We can choose press quality, marks and bleeds. Do you want the printer to see where those trim marks will be, where they're going to cut for the bleed? You can choose, you have all kinds of different choices and settings, which we will go into at a later date, but you can choose to use those document bleed settings that we set up at the very beginning. So at a later demonstration we'll go into these export settings in detail, but for now it's kind of interesting for you to know that you can export PDFs, you can export other documents, you can save as an EPS. This is a very typical format, Illustrator EPS, and EPS stands for Encapsulated Postscript. EPS is very useful. It's another file type that I use, particularly when I have traced the type in the project I'm working on. It's another typical Exchange format that you can use with printers and other designers and other people working in industry. So when we get to that point, I'll go over this export type in depth. And this is just a little general overview for you in starting a new project, filling out those basic new document settings and what that kind of means, as well as saving a document under File, Save, or File, Save As, and some of those export options that you have. And this concludes the introduction to starting a new project and saving projects.